I've just started the recording. Um, Wanted to welcome everybody. My name is Bill Nowlin. It claims that I'm SABR Virtual, which I guess I am at least temporarily. But I wanted to welcome everybody to the second virtual meeting of the Boston chapter of SABR. Last month, we had a really excellent meeting with Louis Tiant and Saul Wisnia. And tonight, we thought we'd talk a little bit more about this very unusual year in baseball, and we have three guests on tap. I'd just like to start by turning the program over to one of the leaders of the Boston chapter, David Laurila of FanGraphs, and ask you, David, to introduce yourself and then in turn our other two guests. And we'll just have a free-flowing conversation. If you've got something you want to convey, I'd suggest you put it in the chat. I see pretty much everybody has muted themselves, which is a good practice. We don't have that many people. We probably won't have a lot of problems with people interrupting each other, but sometimes there's dogs barking in the background or something of that sort that it's worth cutting off. But we'll hopefully get into a good discussion, and you can enter things on the chat, or maybe we'll just talk out loud when the time comes. But David, why don't you kick it off?
I don't know that there's a lot to say about myself outside of the fact that I'm at FanGraphs. I've been there 9.5 years. I was at Baseball Prospectus before that. I guess notably, this is my 10th year in the BBWAA, which means that I have a Hall of Fame vote for the first time coming up. I also have a vote for the Spink Award, which is pretty notable. Yeah. And really, that's about it.
How long have you been in the Boston area?
Oh boy, 1988. Originally from Michigan. There was a gap of a few years where I lived in Toronto in the early 90s. I was going to games in Sky Dome at the time of the baseball strike there, which was pretty disappointing. Although I'm not a big fan of. Wasn't a big fan of Sky Dome, certainly. That's not a lot of interesting stuff about me, really. So let's introduce Josh. Josh Whetzel, tell us about yourself.
Hi guys, I'm the Triple-A, hopefully still Triple-A broadcaster for the Rochester Red Wings. I've been in Rochester since 2003. And I've been broadcasting minor league baseball since 1995. I started in the South Atlantic League with the final Albany Polecats team, which was the South Atlantic League affiliate of the Montreal Expos. We had Vladimir Guerrero on that team. Then I was in Kinston, North Carolina for 4 years with the old Kinston Indians, 3 years with the Binghamton Mets, and now with the Red Wings since 2003.
And Adam?
Hey, so I guess since David's been with FanGraphs for 9.5 years, I can say I've been with Baseball Reference for 9.5 days now. It's very, very fresh. Started there last week, working on all the sites, not just baseball. But before that, I was actually contracting with them for 6 years. So it's a relatively easy transition to move there full time. Before that, just worked a lot at different tech companies, but thrilled to finally make Baseball Reference the daytime job.
Some of us use it almost every day.
It was that, yeah. It's one of those things, like I've been using it for 20 years, so to be able to make it the job, then that's awesome.
I think it's fair to say that most people on the call use it, if not every day, close to, and hopefully people are on FanGraphs nearly as often.
Big fan of FanGraphs too, yes.
In this particular chapter, we have a number of people that follow a certain team with some regularity. This was a pretty unusual year. Now, Josh, you didn't have nearly as much work to do this past year.
I had nothing to do. Yeah. I know you guys are Red Sox fans. I'm glad I wasn't with the Red Wings in '81 for the 33-inning game in Pawtucket, that's for sure.
Oh, well, they lost.
Yeah. It was a pretty uneventful season for me. I watched a lot of games once the season actually started, but this was my first year without broadcasting any baseball whatsoever since I was in high school. So hopefully 2021 will be at least somewhat more normal, and I'll have a fairly full schedule of games to broadcast.
And you should fill people in, Josh, on the situation with the Red Wings right now.
Well, yeah, yesterday it was announced that the Red Wings Major League affiliate, the Minnesota Twins, are going to drop their affiliation with us and become affiliated with the St. Paul Saints, who've been an independent league team for a long time. Of course, geographically, it's a good fit for the Twins, and the Saints were close together, although I think that geographic proximity is a little bit overrated personally. But it's going to be interesting now to see what happens with the Red Wings. The Red Wings have been around for about 100 years, and the Twins were only the third affiliate they'd ever had. So whoever we wind up with next will be just the fourth affiliate. I am keeping my fingers crossed and holding my breath and everything I can do that it's going to be in Triple-A, although I'm a little bit nervous as far as that's concerned. But just have to wait and see what shakes out over the next couple of weeks.
And I first met you, of course, in Pawtucket, and Pawtucket will have no baseball going forward, which is disappointing for a lot of people here.
Is it a given right now that whenever 2021's season begins, is the ballpark in Worcester going to be ready to go? Are they sure about that?
It looks like it.
Yeah.
Did somebody have more update on that? Maybe Greg?
Yeah, I'm on the booster club, and all signs point to that the stadium will definitely be ready for April. I mean, they put the sod in last week for the infield.
Oh, wow. Well, that would be good. I hope Rochester is still around in the same league as Worcester, because that would be fun to go there. It looks like it's going to be a great ballpark, and that is an hour closer or so to Rochester, so it eases up the travel for everybody in the International League a little bit too. So that will be a good thing. But it's too bad McCoy Stadium didn't get more of a proper send off. That's for sure.
Do you have any Pawtucket stories from your time broadcasting there, Josh?
Well, when I first started in the league, Pawtucket was always, actually probably for the first 10 years or so, the main thing Pawtucket was known for broadcasters was that it had the best press box food in the IL. So everybody loved to go to Pawtucket because the food was so good in the McCoy Stadium press box. Doesn't have that reputation anymore. But it was a great place to do games from a broadcast standpoint, especially for someone like me who did games solo on the road, because the booth is a little bit cramped there. But as a solo broadcaster on the road, there was plenty of room, and you're right over home plate, probably a little bit like Old Tiger Stadium's broadcast perch. Even when there were not great crowds there, it still sounded good on the air because the roof held in the crowd sound really well. So it was a fun place to broadcast games from, for sure. And boy, I would have to add it up. I saw, probably 150 or more games in that ballpark over the last 17, 18 years. So I spent a lot of time there. I liked it a lot better when the team stayed in downtown Providence. That was more fun. But McCoy Stadium was certainly unique and was an interesting place to go. The Red Wings lost there in the playoffs one year. And of course, whenever the Red Wings and Pawtucket get together, you always wind up talking about the longest game in 1981.
Joanne and I had a chance to say farewell to McCoy at one point earlier this year. We went down for one of the dining on the diamond dinners, and we sat out of the shortstop position and had a pretty good meal, actually.
Yeah.
Everybody socially distanced, and it was nice to have a chance to get down and see the park one more time.
I mean, one thing for me, I like and appreciate the old ballparks, but new ballparks have certainly some positives for them too. And the elevator was a long way from the press box there. So, and if you had to climb up there, you would really be winded to get up to the top of the stadium, going through that spiral staircase to the top. So that is something I certainly will not miss if I get to do games in Worcester moving forward, because it could be kind of a pain in the rear occasionally to get up there and actually broadcast the games. The other thing is, after fireworks night there, you would have a huge traffic jam getting out of McCoy Stadium, which could be a real nightmare at times also. So there were a couple of times where the Rochester Red Wings put it into hyperdrive, trying to get loaded up on the bus to avoid the traffic jam on, say, a 4th of July or something like that.
David, how you went to you covered a number of games at Fenway Park this year. Why don't you describe how you got access to the park and how, the protocols and how safe it seemed, and then what it was like covering a game from there.
Right. Well, you were there, of course, several times as well, Bill. The protocols were pretty simple. With a BBWA card, you couldn't just simply walk into the park, which normally you can walk into any park around the country, and they just wave you in. Here you had to apply game by game. They only let in one person per media entity. And you, of course, had to be masked. The press box windows were open at all times. Fortunately, it was a beautiful summer. It would have been somewhat of a mess had the season started in spring or gone deep into the fall. I guess deep into the fall wouldn't have been terrible in other respects. And we were spaced out by a good way, which was easy with a smaller number of people in the press box. And of course, the big thing is the clubhouses were not open. So it was impossible to go in and talk to players. It was not possible to walk onto the field for batting practice. And as anybody who covers baseball will tell you, those are, some of the joys of the job, just to really be part of that experience. I'm thinking more of on the field than in the clubhouse. So it was a very different season. And needless to say, no fans in the stands I think you notice it more in the park than you do on television. If you're watching on TV, you do see it, but you can really focus in on the game. When you're looking down from the press box, it looks very weird. It's like you're watching a scrimmage.
I thought the audio in the park was weirder than the audio on a broadcast too. The cheer of the crowd. I think they got to doing a pretty good job on television broadcasts, but in the park it was just very weird. It was often delayed by a second or so, and there'd be some play happen, and there'd be this moment, and that somebody said, "Oh, that's right, I got to push this button or something."
Yeah, I don't know if anybody who is on the Zoom here happened to be watching that game on television, but I remember one game where Alex Verdugo hit a routine fly ball with a few guys on base, and as he ran to first base in the silent stadium, he let go of an F-bomb that was just not, it wasn't sharp. It was a long drawn out thing that lasted like 4 seconds. And it was, I suppose with a second or two delay on TV, they probably got rid of that, but it was a bit of a laugh in the press box.
You do hear things you wouldn't normally hear. Yeah, I thought they did a pretty good job. When you had to fill out, it became a routine questionnaire about whether you'd met anybody that had COVID or so forth, but they did take your temperature as you came in, and you were not free to wander around the ballpark. You mentioned not going to the clubhouse or onto the field, but you couldn't go anywhere in the ballpark except to the press box, in and out again, and there was a place that you could pick up some food. But just wandering around on top of the Green Monster or something like that was not, go out and chat with the cardboard cutouts and so forth. That wasn't really permitted. I did go to one of the games out in Buffalo just to see what that was like. The idea of the Red Sox playing a major league game in Buffalo intrigued me. It's about whatever it was, 7 or 8 hour drive out. And it was the same thing there. I was met by somebody, checked in, and then they just escorted me to where my seat was and said, essentially, don't leave there. There's the men's room. There's where you can get a drink or some food. And so I went to this park, but I didn't get a chance to explore it at all. It's a little disappointing, but it's just the way it was. But I felt they did a pretty good job keeping it safe. I was a little surprised at some of the players, because originally they had said that the protocols included things like no high fives and wearing masks in the dugout. And that didn't last all that long. Some, every once in a while you see a player doing an elbow bump or something like that, but an awful lot of times they were just right into it.
And I guess in the World Series, we had maybe a little bit more breaking of protocol.
Yeah.
Yeah, we haven't heard much from Adam tonight. Adam, you should talk a little about what you're doing with your new job and a little about StatHead.
Yeah, so like I said, last week I started with Sports Reference, which was the company that makes Baseball Reference and all sorts of sports sites. We got Basketball Reference, Pro Football Reference, FB Ref is the new international soccer one that I work pretty heavily on as well. I'm the head of user experience there. So what that means is it's my job to kind of make sure people can use the site and get done what they need to get done and make sure it's as pleasant and useful as possible. So I do a lot of talking to users. I do a lot of designing things. And one of those things is StatHead. That's our paid tool that we've been you might know the play index that all the sports reference sites had. We've been moving it over to a new StatHead name and marketing it as just this all-in-one sports analytics suite that you can purchase a subscription to and find just about anything that you want about history of the whatever sport you're looking at. So I've been working a lot on those tools as well.
And on StatHead, you can find out some pretty amazing things. Just the other day, I decided I wanted to learn which pitchers in history had the same number of wins, losses, and saves. And I knew there would be a lot. I knew there would be a lot of ones, but how many had 30 some of each? I learned an answer to that.
Nice.
A few clicks of a mouse. I did solicit help to get a little better at StatHead, but it's if I can figure it out, anybody can figure it out.
And if anybody has any trouble with it, you can always feel free to hit me up on Twitter or email because I'm always interested. I'm probably more interested when people aren't able to do what they want with it because I want to help them do that. So,
what is
Adam,
the best way to do that? By the way, to go to Twitter or email, does it matter?
It doesn't matter. My email address is my initials, ad@sportsreference.com, or you can find me on Twitter at baseballtwit if that's something that you do.
Okay.
And Adam, you are a stat and trivia geek. Throw something at us. You must have looked at something the last few days.
Gosh. So one of the things that I was looking at in the last few days was because of this 2020 season, we've gotten a lot of questions about spans of games, like who has hit the most home runs over a 60 game span and things like that, because obviously it was a 60 game season. So I'll throw out that one was Barry Bonds. Yeah, of course, he had 37 home runs in a 60 game span. I think it was an 01.
That's more than the whole American League in 1903 or whatever.
Yeah.
I guess I can jump in and say a little about my Rookie of the Year vote.
Yeah.
I was on MLB Network yesterday talking about that. And basically what I had to say was it was not really hard to choose Kyle Lewis over Luis Robert. The difficult thing was deciding which players had enough playing time in a 60 game season to merit being voted for. For instance, Willie Castro, the Tigers infielder, hit, I think 349 with a 550 slugging percentage, but he had 140 plate appearances. Now, Willie McCovey was it 59, I believe, had maybe 240 plate appearances in 162 game, 154? No, they're at 162 there, right? By 59? Whichever. And, he won the Rookie of the Year. So there is precedent, but I decided that 140 wasn't enough. So James Karinchak, who struck out about 18 batters per 9 innings, got my third vote.
Dave.
No Red Sox were strong candidates.
Dave, a question came in on the chat asking if you were at Fenway Park when an intruder stopped the game.
I was indeed. Were you there that day?
I was there, yeah.
Yeah, that was a little strange. If people not aware of it, somebody who I never did hear much about him. I know from appearance he was older than I expected. I thought this was maybe a 20-something, but he looked like he was at least in his 40s.
I think he was in his 48 or 49 or something like that. He climbed up the wall from behind somehow. Right?
Exactly. And I didn't know that was actually possible, but he actually scaled the back of the Green Monster and got up onto the camera well in center field and was carrying on like a crazy man. It took a long time to get him down.
He was doing push-ups at one point out there on the ledge. It was like really weird. Anybody here a crime reporter or something? I've been kind of curious. I've never followed up on that. He had to make some kind of an entrance or appearance in the public record, and how to research that. I'd like to find out what the story is to the extent that we can.
Were there more drone delays or fan intruder delays this year in Major League Baseball?
There was one drone delay at Fenway Park also.
Yeah, was it only one or were there two?
It was the only one that I know of, only one I observed.
And Trevor Bauer was not in town at the time. The Cy Young Award winner, they announced that a few hours ago. I assume people have heard.
No, I hadn't.
And he is now, being a free agent. Where will he be? Is Boston possible? That would be kind of fun. He'd be a great quote if we can get into the clubhouse to talk to him.
Right. It's a good question about any team has the question of budget this year is how much they're willing to spend on, and he's willing to work on one-year contracts apparently, I guess. So that would be an advantage, but.
He is willing, but I am not expecting that. I know his agent has come out and said that now that he is open to more.
Yeah.
And given the uncertainty of the following season, I think anybody who can get multiple years and the security of that probably really has to do it, because it's a big gamble.
Yeah.
To say that baseball's economics will be in good shape for the next few years.
Another question came in asking me if the game that I went to in Buffalo or my trip to Buffalo included the game that did not get played because of the Black Lives Matter protest. No, I drove out one day, drove out early in the morning, saw the game, stayed overnight, and thought about staying for one more day and decided to come back home instead because the weather was kind of iffy. But I did get to see the game. I was not there for the game that didn't get played.
I got one very fast McCovey story because Dave brought it up.
Oh, please do.
Dave, so someone said to Casey Stengel if he wondered if the shift would work against McCovey. And he said, sure, we'll just put a guy in the right field stands.
Yeah.
Or you could put Bobby Richards in there.
Anybody, feel free to say anything. I think that, we all observe the season one way or another. And one of the things that SABR Boston often has had are just social get-togethers where we just sit and talk about baseball. And I think anything's really fair game.
I got a very simple McCovey story. I used to live in San Francisco, and he was the fan favorite. I got to see him get his last RBI, which was simply a sacrifice fly, but still, I treasure it. He was a really well-loved guy.
Dave, do you know the answer to this question? It was Bauer, the first Cincinnati Red to win a Cy Young Award.
Yes, somewhat amazingly, yes.
Yeah.
So I feel like I let everybody down with a Barry Bonds home run stat when I was asked to provide trivia, because that's like the least interesting stat there is. And I remember there was one that came up today, so I wanted to share it, and it is Red Sox related. So a lot of the guys at Sports Reference are really into the Phillies because that's where the company is located. So we were talking about old 1993 platoons as we do. And the Pete Incaviglia and Milt Thompson one came up. And what was interesting about their platoon is both guys started just about half the games. So we started looking to see what other platoon pairings had started the most even number of games. And there is one pair in history that started 81 games apiece. And it's the 1974 Red Sox shortstops. And that's Rick Burleson and Mario Guerrero. They each started 81 games. That's the only time that's happened for one team in one position.
It is, I mean, it's just pure coincidence, I guess, but things happen.
Right.
Yeah, I have an interesting stat tidbit. I interviewed Mickey Tettleton recently, and that interview should go up on FanGraphs maybe next week. But in researching Tettleton a bit, who of course I remember from his playing days, he spent 5 years with the Tigers, and Cecil Fielder was one of his teammates the entire 5 years. Tettleton had the higher OPS all 5 years, which is remarkable when you think about Cecil. And this was fairly prime Cecil Fielder. So Mickey Tettleton was a very, very underrated baseball player.
Somebody posed a question to me earlier today, somebody from Games Project. Babe Ruth had when he was a pitcher, had a 5-for-5 game for the Red Sox at one point. And at the time I researched this, which was 15 or so years ago, no pitcher had ever had a 6-for-6 game or a 6-hit game. Does anybody know if that has happened since that time? If not, but it's something we could look up.
Yeah, and I have a Ruth question that's very easy for people to look up, but without looking it up, does anybody know what his one lost record was after he became an outfielder and would only pitch occasionally? Any guesses?
3-0 or something like that.
No, 5-0.
That is correct.
Oh, good.
It's from me, Bill, the oldest man in the world.
Oh, okay.
There I am.
There you are.
Hey, David, I had a question for you. You're writing at FanGraphs, which I always look forward to. It seems like it depends a lot on live interviews, which you weren't able to do this year. How did you, or how workable was it for you to use Zoom, or I don't know what else you used to talk to players when you couldn't talk to them?
It was very difficult. I've quoted very few people from Zoom calls because anything that I ask on a Zoom call, anybody can use those quotes.
Yeah.
So anything that I good is not really gold. I did arrange a number of phone interviews, either through Teams or through agencies, and that was really the best way to go. And I focused more this summer on former players than I had in the past as well. Fred Lynn, if nobody has seen that, it's worth looking for. It focused mostly or almost entirely on his time with the Tigers, which is short. And I picked that subject in part because I'm interested in the Detroit Tigers, but also because nobody ever asked him about that. And I know that played a role in him accepting the interview because he gets a lot of requests. And he enjoyed talking about those years, or that year plus, which was it was not the Boston years, certainly.
Yeah, the problem with the Zoom calls is you have everybody else on the call at the same time, and engaging with a player and having a chance to talk one-on-one is you're going to get a whole different tenor of conversation, content, as well as demeanor and so forth, than if you get a chance to actually chat with somebody for a little bit.
Oh, there's a huge difference. And, somebody like Josh will know this from the work he does. Broadcasters, of course, talk to players all the time. But if I go into a clubhouse in a normal situation and talk to a player one-on-one, it's a very different interview if he is sitting there alone, or if we go to the dugout, or if he has teammates sitting right next to him in the next lockers. If there's a peanut gallery there, the player is far more careful about what he says.
It's a performance when you're on a Zoom call with a bunch of people, and they're very aware of that.
I think one of the reasons David's such a good interviewer too is because the player or coach or whoever he's talking to realizes that David knows what he's talking about. And I think it's probably a lot easier to get the player to understand that you actually know what you're talking about when you're actually dealing with them one-on-one and asking smart questions than you can probably do in a group in a Zoom setting.
Thanks, Josh. Check is in the mail. And it helps too now that FanGraphs has become so much better known to players. You know, FanGraphs has been popular for a while, but as recently as 3 or 4 years ago, the percentage of players who at least claimed they didn't know FanGraphs was, I would say it was no more than 50%, but it was very real. Now it's very rare to hear, oh, I don't know FanGraphs.
So I got a question for Adam. At Sports Reference, as you mentioned, they do follow many other sports. I did a book once on football players and World War II. So I was using Football Reference at that point. I'm curious, and I joined the Pro Football, I can't remember the name of the organization. I just joined it for a year, but Pro Football, essentially the SABR of football. What percentage of people that use the site, roughly speaking, are interested in baseball as opposed to other sports? And do you see a distinct growth in maybe basketball or football compared to baseball in recent years?
Yeah, right now, the football traffic is our best right now, obviously, because it's the sport that has things going on.
Yeah.
But in general, basketball does really well. The basketball site is very well respected in like the analytical circles, and the traffic there is really good. In terms of the stat head subscriptions, I see that always broken out by sport or by multiple sports. Our two most popular are definitely baseball. Like that's where that's the bread and butter. That's what people are originally finding stat head for. But the second is the subscription to get all sports. So it's interesting to see people are interested in not just their one sport, but into researching everything.
When I was doing my research, it was about 10 years ago, and I had the impression that the other sports were way, way secondary to baseball at that point in time. The site just was far more developed on the baseball side.
Yeah, that certainly was because it had several years of a head start.
Yep.
But they have dedicated developers to each and every site now, and the analytics have caught up significantly on certain ones, like actually, yeah, all of them really. Even the soccer site that's just a couple of years old has a lot of really advanced metrics that nobody else has. So it's become kind of a go-to source for those things too.
Yeah, I'll throw out another quiz to everybody here because this is going on in my Sunday notes column where I usually include a quiz. I was on the BRES football site today, which is fairly rare for me. Bo Jackson, of course, won a Heisman Trophy, played in the NFL and played in Major League Baseball. Who was the player who preceded him with those 3 feats? No one?
Does it go all the way back to Thorpe?
Jim Thorpe.
No, I believe it was more like 1950-ish. He played for Ohio State when he won the Heisman, and he was not a great baseball player or a great NFL player. So it's
Hop
not
Cassidy?
Pardon?
Hop Cassidy?
No. Nobody here is scrambling to the internet to find an answer, it looks like. It was Vic Zanowitz. A name that I have heard, but I have very little familiarity with him.
So David, here's a question from the chat for you. The question says, do you have a typical prep routine for your interviews?
Typical, no. I'm certainly on Baseball Ref and FanGraphs a lot for anything stat related. And I'll do searches, of course, with stories that have been written about players. But while preparation is very important, one thing that I've learned over the years is to not over prepare. I rarely script anything, whether it's on the phone or live. I have ideas of what I want to make sure I ask, but I like things to be organic. if I pick a subject or subjects that I know players are interested in talking about or willing to talk about, I try to turn it into a fairly informal conversation and give them as much room as I can to talk.
You never know what you might find out. Things may come out unexpectedly if you're not channeling the conversation too much.
Correct. There have been many instances where I thought I was going to talk primarily about one thing and write about it, and something came up where suddenly that little, bell goes up or light over your head, and that's what you want to talk about. Josh, do you have any good stories, broadcasting stories from interesting interactions with players? You have a million. What can you tell without throwing anyone under a bus?
Yeah, and some probably aren't suitable for a family program. I did games for a number of years with Joe Altobelli with the Red Wings, and a lot of you probably know Joe's name from his time managing the Orioles and then also the Giants. We talked about the Willie McCovey. Joe's first job managing in the major leagues was in '77 with the Giants. And this is not really, I guess, what David was asking me, but I think one of the amazing things about Joe's career is that I believe in 70, it may have been in '77, his first year, they didn't do well. And then '78, they did very well, or 76 to 77. But either way, from one year to the next, that's what it was. I'm sorry to backtrack here. In '76, the Giants were bad. Manager got fired and Joe took over in '77. Their attendance went up by 1 million fans from one year to the next at Candlestick Park. And that was obviously without moving into a new ballpark, which I think is a pretty amazing thing. And I just wonder if that's ever been done before, where somebody's attendance went up 1 million from one season to the next without moving ballparks. But yeah, I've had a lot of interesting interactions with players over the years, to tell you the truth, David. And nothing, I guess, is immediately popping into my mind at the moment that maybe is what you're talking about. But I think one of the things that I've done that I think serves me well is, like you say, going to the clubhouse, going to the field to talk to players. And I think some of the newer broadcasters that are getting into the business now don't go down to the field and the dugout and the clubhouse as much, and just kind of sit up in the press box in front of a laptop looking up stuff on the computer. And you miss out on a lot of good nuggets that can help inform what your broadcast is going to sound like that way.
Yeah, my Sunday column last week led with the story about how Joe Block, who does play-by-play for the Pittsburgh Pirates, got his first job. And he went to the baseball winter meetings right out of college at Michigan State. They were in Anaheim. And he got an interview with Charleston, I believe. And Dave Raymond, who now does play-by-play for the Texas Rangers, was the person who interviewed him. And Joe would have been an intern, was the job. So that's mostly pre and post game, getting 6 or 10 games on the air when the play-by-play guy, takes any time off. Well, it turns out that Dave Raymond got hired by a Triple-A team shortly thereafter and was replaced by a pair of guys. If I remember the names, Josh, is it Lucas? Is it Jim Lucas?
Yeah, Jim Lucas and Don Wardlow.
And Don Wardlow did the play-by-play. And actually, you probably are very familiar. Why don't you say, Josh, tell us a bit about Don Wardlow.
Well, he was born blind. He was sightless. And somehow he and Jim Lucas were friends, and Jim was a broadcaster. And when Jim got hired to broadcast minor league baseball, he hired Don to be his analyst. And the two of them were together at various stops throughout the minor leagues. They were in New England, as a matter of fact, I believe with New Britain, Connecticut for a while. And they were together for probably 10 or 15 years at least, broadcasting at various spots in minor league baseball. And I never heard their broadcasts, but apparently they had great chemistry. And Don, even though he could not see the game, obviously, and was basing everything he said off of his partner's descriptions, apparently their chemistry was great, and they did a wonderful job.
And I believe that Wardlow read a lot of his own notes on Braille
Yeah, that's right.
and
He had
did
to-
extend.
He had to type up Braille cards every day. I mean, he must have worked on that stuff all day long to get ready for the games.
Right, and apparently did intense research, so he was always very prepared. And Joe Block said that it was an invaluable experience as a broadcaster because he's working at radio. So he said he had to be very precise and accurate with every call because he said his analyst was the same as every listener. They couldn't see what was happening. So he learned, in the so many games that one summer, how to be a very precise play-by-play man. I thought that was a great story.
And a couple other questions that came in on the chat, maybe in reverse order. Adam, someone said, I really enjoy your Hall of Stats website. Do you still update it?
Thank you very much. First of all, that was a very, very important site to me for a long time. It was a pet project. I have not been updating it as much as I would have liked because work kind of got crazy. But now that I've kind of made sports the day job, I'm hoping to finally devote some time back to keeping that up to date as well. I also got a direct question from Peter that I wanted to address too. It's almost like I wrote this question myself to bring it up here. He said, Adam, what about women's sports? Are they getting traction with the stats? And that's really interesting because that's something that Sports Reference is very dedicated to, is making sure that we can bring the women's leagues across all sports to light and present some new advanced metrics for all of those that, again, nobody has. And while the traffic isn't pouring in yet, we're happy to be on the front step of that, really pushing that. And one nice sign the other day was a 538 article about Sue Bird and Megan Rapinoe came out, and it linked to Basketball Reference for Sue's stats and FB Ref for Megan Rapinoe's stats. So it's great that we're already seen as the source of truth for their stats, and that's a place that we really want to be, and that's important to us.
Dave, somebody wanted to know if you'll have a Hall of Fame vote. Are there, let me phrase this in a more general fashion, are there classes of candidates that you might not vote for one reason or another? One example might be Roger Clemens.
I've spent more time thinking about that over the past year than anybody can imagine, or maybe as much as people would imagine. I think the answer is yes on people like Clemens and Bonds, but I'm not positive yet. It's a hard call. Manny Ramirez is an even harder call because of when, he got caught using, performance enhancing drugs. So I think the answer is yes on those people. I will also say that there is another player for non-PED reasons that I'm going to struggle to whether I want to vote for. And I guess maybe I don't really want to go into that right now. Yeah. I think people can maybe guess who that is.
Do you want us to?
I think he might be a former Rochester Red Wings.
He had some very memorable postseason performances. Let me jump to another question. I see that came here from me. It was the worst interview I ever did. Yep. And I actually like that question more than
I can answer that too, maybe.
I never have an answer for that. And I won't name the player, but I was at Hadlock Field in Portland 3, 4, 5 years ago. I forget exactly when. And there was a player for the Trenton Yankees. And Trenton, of course, has lost their affiliation as of a few days ago. It was early in the year and he was hitting about 400. He was not a big time prospect, but he was a prospect. I think he made it to the big leagues. But he brought I'm working as hard as I can. I worry about my teammates, blah, blah, blah. It was Derek Jeter at his absolute worst with canned, safe answers, to the point that as I walked away from what was about a 2.5-minute interview, I actually erased the tape on my recorder as I was walking away because, maybe the player had been burned recently. I don't know, but it was a caricature with his answers.
just too pablum, basically.
It was impossibly bad.
Yeah.
It was the same answers in slightly different words for about 2 minutes.
When I was first
I
starting
can
out,
say-
whoops, sorry, David.
No, I was just going to say that I don't know how many quote unquote bad interviews I did, but I can say that I'm always disappointed when players turn down interviews, especially if they're not high profile players. I've had people like Frank Thomas and Albert Pujols turn me down, not wanting to talk hitting. And frankly, I don't mind that because the number of requests they get every day is, it's obvious. So, but I can say right now, if Frank Thomas or Albert Pujols happens to be on this, Zoom call, please reconsider.
I saw one of them try to get in, but I didn't admit them into the, like.
Payback.
Yeah, one other thing to plug my own work. We do podcasts at FanGraphs. We do, Effectively Wild, and we also do FanGraphs Audio. I'm scheduled to interview Gabe Kapler tomorrow afternoon for a FanGraphs Audio segment that should run on Friday. So knock on wood that something doesn't happen to prevent that from happening.
Did you have a story, Josh?
Oh, just in terms of interviews, I remember when I was first starting out with the Albany Polecats in the South Atlantic League, the day before the season started, Brad Fulmer, who you probably remember, it was his first full year in pro ball. And Brad kind of pulled me aside away from the other players and said, hey, anytime you need somebody to interview, I want you to ask me because I'm going to be a good major league player and I need to be good at doing interviews. And so there were times during that season, I can think of one time in particular where we got rained out one night in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I enjoyed the night off a little bit too much and I wasn't feeling very well the next day. And so I went right to Brad Fulmer and said, today's a day, Brad, I could use an interview, a little help. And he just wanted to practice doing interviews because he knew he was going to be a major leaguer and he wanted to be good at it.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah. And then I don't think he turned out to be a very good interviewer. I don't think he turned out to be very good at interviews in the major leagues, actually, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I'm biased, but I think that all players should strive to be good interviews when they're in the minor leagues.
And just treat media members nicely. I mean, specifically a former Red Wing and a former longtime Twin who's now at the Rangers, Kyle Gibson. Kyle is so good with the media that when he doesn't pitch well, I think it's only human nature. A lot of members of the media don't maybe criticize him as much as they could otherwise, just because he's so nice to them. It's just the way we're wired. And so if you're nice to people, they tend to be nice to you. That's how it works. And I think a lot of people could probably learn a pretty good lesson from that.
Yeah, and I can vouch for Kyle. Kyle Gibson is a fantastic human being.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned bad performances. I had the pleasure of covering all 7 games of the Indians Cubs World Series, which of course ended in extra innings in Game 7. And mental block, Brian Shaw was the losing pitcher for the Indians. And when they opened the clubhouse, after a little longer time than in a regular season game, of course, dozens, maybe 100 media members come pouring in. Brian Shaw was standing directly in front of his locker and answered every and all questions, calmly and professionally. It was, you don't always see that. After tough losses, guys will hide in the shower. They'll come out after an extended period of time and get it over with as quickly as possible. But Shaw that was very impressive.
My worst interview was one of the first ones I ever did. It was back in the late 1990s. I was doing a book on Ted Williams, and we actually interviewed 200 people that had known him at one time or another. We weren't aiming for that figure. It just happened to be out that way. Ball players, but also people from other walks of life. I had a great 45-minute interview with John Glenn. But when I called up Tony Lupian on the phone, he'd been a player on a 1940 Red Sox team, I believe it was. I wasn't prepared. And the first thing he did is tested me. He said, "What position did I play?" And the answer is first base, but I didn't know that at the time. I had fundamental elementary preparation. And he said, if you can't do your research, why should I talk to you? And terminated the call. So there was a good lesson that I will never forget. Try to do a little bit of preparation anyhow.
Know your first baseman.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
your
certainly can't blame him.
Your Ted Williams mention brings up yet another recent interview I did. I had the pleasure of interviewing Dick Hall, the former right-handed reliever, who had actually started his career with the Pirates as an infielder. Dick Hall, when I talked to him, was 89 years old. He turned 90 a few days later. Phenomenal memory, but one of the stories he told me was about facing Ted Williams. He said that he couldn't tell you what he did against a lot of individual hitters, but Williams was so famous and so important that he can remember most of the at-bats. And he talked in depth about one, which involved throwing a changeup that he fooled Williams on in an at-bat. A few pitches later, he fooled him again and got a dribble or foul. He made the mistake of throwing a third changeup to Ted in the same at-bat, and that didn't work out very well.
Yeah, that was one of Ted Williams' specialties, was anticipating the pitch based on what came before. There's a whole book called Facing Ted Williams that somebody put together. Somebody may know the author. I don't remember it, but he interviewed pitchers that had faced Ted Williams and put together a book on the subject. It was a great idea, I thought. When you could do it. There's not too many left. This book was 20 years or so ago. But.
Yeah, one question I asked Dick that he said he did not remember is he gave up grand slams to Jim Gentile in consecutive innings. He did remember a game where he was teammates with Gentile when Gentile hit a grand slam and a 3-run homer in consecutive at-bats against the same pitch, maybe not the same pitcher, but he somehow managed to get out of his memory the giving up the 2 grand slams.
Yeah. Certain things you want to repress, maybe.
Yeah, Josh, what is the longest home run that you have seen calling minor league baseball? Who hit it?
Well, one that immediately sticks out is probably from a guy that a lot of you haven't heard of, but his name is Adam Brett Walker, and he did not make the major leagues, but was an incredible power hitter throughout the minors. And he was in Rochester, I guess, 3 or 4 years ago. And if you've ever seen the new ballpark in Durham, above their Blue Monster, they have a 3 or 4 story high brick building. And Adam hit the 3rd floor of that building. So the Blue Monster, I think, is 32 feet high. Then there's 3 or 4 stories above that. And he hit like 3 floors up. It was insane. Like people still point up there and just marvel that they saw a home run go that far. So that was one that sticks out certainly from the last few years. I saw Rob. I don't know, since you guys are in New England, many of you, I don't know if you've ever been to the ballpark in Norwich, Connecticut, which is a big ballpark. Not a lot of home runs are hit there. But when I was in the Eastern League, I saw Rob Stratton, who's another guy who never made the major leagues, hit 3 home runs in one game for Binghamton, 1 to left, 1 to center, and 1 to right in Norwich, which, I mean, it was an absolute graveyard, but Stratton was able to bring it to his knees. You were talking about bad interviews, by the way, David. I remember a number of years ago when Dave Miley managed Scranton Wilkes-Barre, the Yankees. He could be kind of a pain in the ass, quite frankly. And I always delighted in trying to get him to do an interview because he always turned me down. Hey, Dave, if he saw me walking, he'd put his cell phone up to his ear and pretend he was on a call. He never wanted to talk to anybody. So one day I actually went into his office in Scranton, and he was surrounded by a few of his bobos in there. And I said, Dave, could I grab you for a pregame interview today? And he's like, nah, interview Stump. So he put me on the spot. Stump Merrill was one of the guys sitting in his office. And now, I kind of was challenged. So I felt like I had to ask Stump, hey, Stump, would you mind if I ask you to do a pregame interview? And he said, yeah, sure, I don't give a shit or whatever. And fortunately, I had just enough institutional knowledge of Stump Merrill that we could do the interview. But, I was surrounded by all of his buddies in there. It was really an awkward situation with Miley putting me on the spot like that.
Anyone out there have any good questions for any of us?
About anything.
I'll get a Hall of Fame opinion from anybody who can answer verbally or maybe in chat. Omar Vizquel is, I don't know if controversial is quite the right word, but there are a lot of people with strong opinions on whether he should be elected to the Hall of Fame. What do people think on him?
Not everybody has it memorized, maybe.
Hall of really good.
Hmm.
Yeah, I can't say that I'm a Vizquel supporter, but being of a stats background, that's probably not very surprising. Sabermetrics don't love him. They love his defense, still very good, but just gave too much back on offense.
Right. Well, the thing that I keep coming around to on that, and I'll say, while I'm not sure, I am leaning toward voting for him. And part of it is how highly he rates in hits all time by a shortstop. Unless I'm mistaken, Jeter and maybe Honus Wagner, because we don't have all of his positional splits from far back. I think Vizquel has the most hits at the shortstop position. The Ripkins, et cetera, played, a lot of third as well. And people will say, well, that's a counting stat. But the number of players and former players that I've talked to, when I brought up counting stats, they have said, do you know how good you have to be to play in the major leagues long enough to get those counting stats? And I think there's value in that. Carl Yastrzemski, late in his career, well, he was obviously on a different level than Vizquel overall, added to a lot of counting stats the last few years as a fairly average player.
Yeah, the longevity is wonderful. It's rare how long he lasted. I mean, counting stats can go both ways too. I mean, I'm just looking now. He is 43rd in career hits, which is very impressive. But he's also 7th all time in outs made. So the fact that you're playing that long also has some negative ramifications as well.
Yeah, he played in the wrong era. Had he played one era earlier, I think he's already in the Hall of Fame. But he happened to come up when suddenly shortstops began hitting.
Right. If a couple generations earlier, and he's Rabbit Moranville, he has the exact same career essentially as Rabbit Moranville.
A few less errors than old Rabbit.
You never hear about write-in candidates. Can you write in a candidate for the Hall of Fame, or are you constrained to just vote for the names on the ballot?
That's a good question. I think you can, but I have not received my first ballot yet.
Yeah.
I did receive the Spink Award ballot, which goes to great writers, for that Hall of Fame wing. And I do know that I'm going to vote for Alan Simpson, who started Baseball America. Just the value that he has added to the game with that publication was just incalculable. It is as important to baseball as baseball ref is to baseball. It's apples and oranges, but it changed the way people look at and learn about baseball.
It's a ballot with listed names.
The Spink?
Yeah.
Yes, there are 3 nominees.
That's all.
Correct. I think it's normally 3 a year. It's Alan Simpson, Marty Noble, who has been in New York forever, and Dick Cagle, who was in Kansas City.
There must be a nominating committee of some sort to have so few names on the ballot.
Correct. And the writers that vote is the same as Hall of Fame. You need 10 years.
Yeah.
David, for the Hall of Fame ballot, do you think you might come close to using all 10 votes this year, or would you have in the past and you think it's clearing up now, or just kind of curious if you're a 5-person voter or 10 or
No,
50?
I'm a big Hall guy. Last year, I definitely would have voted for 10. I haven't looked at the list of eligible players this year for probably a couple of months. But if I don't do 10, it will probably be at least seven or eight. And, would that be the case had the hall been smaller already? That there were, Baines, I suppose, is an obvious answer. Maybe Jim Rice would be a better person to bring up, who, well, he was my favorite player when he played. He maybe isn't a Hall of Famer compared to a lot of other players and doesn't belong, but because players of his ilk are in the Hall of Fame, it's hard for me not to vote for, players who are very similar. And I do think that the word fame is very important in the Hall of Fame. And I think Tommy John belongs in the Hall of Fame for fairly obvious reasons. Everybody knows the name Tommy John. He also has, with 200 and somebody here knows this, 280 wins, maybe 270 some wins. He and Jim Cott are both right up there.
288, right? I think it's 288. Interesting what you say about fame, because Vizquel, he had some gold gloves, but if you look at like MVP vote shares and just kind of the metrics of the day, like that would award him for such things, rates very poorly, like usually at the bottom of the ballot. So I'm curious to see where a lot of the kind of retroactive Vizquel was famous narrative comes from. But anyway, I don't want to harp on Omar Vizquel too much.
Right, but no, I think it's an important subject because there are more Omar Vizquels out there, coming in the years. When I think of fame, I have talked to several players and coaches in the last year about Vizquel, players and coaches from Venezuela, for instance. He's an absolute hero there. He's an icon. How important should it be? Is Ichiro a surefire Hall of Famer if he only gets 2,000 hits in MLB instead of 3,000? He's an icon in another country. How important is that to MLB? There's not necessarily an easy answer to that.
I will note that we've passed the 1 hour mark. There's no reason we need to stop. I think that we can keep going as long as folks are interested, but just noting that.
I got a question for Adam. I believe, Adam, that you're on the committee that deals with the neglected 19th century players.
Yes.
Yeah. So any exciting names on that list this year?
Let's see. I try to take a page from John Thorne and try not to push candidates I feel very strongly about, but I got to say personally that it feels really good to see Charlie Bennett, the old Detroit Wolverines catcher, climbing up the list very quickly. When I first was involved in the committee, he was not on the radar at all, but I think he was like second even last year, I think it was. So it's interesting. I thought of him when David brought up Mickey Tettleton before, because I had a talk at the Hall of Fame with John Thorne. Actually, I get to share a tidbit about Charlie Bennett that one of my Twitter followers sent to me, that at the plate, he was Mickey Tettleton, and with the glove, he was Ivan Rodriguez. Like, that's the type of player he was for his time. Like, he had great plate discipline, great power for the era, and just an incredible fielder.
And a sort of long career, I believe.
He didn't have. I guess it was long for a 19th century catcher, but if you look at his career totals, they just don't look anything like what you'd expect to see today, or even at the early part of the 20th century. But for his time, he was definitely an incredible catcher.
Yeah.
Anything else, or should we I'll call it a night?
We'll do this again in maybe another month or so, sometime in December. We'll try to come up with another program, that's for sure. I think we had about 25 people all together here. Very good turnout.
This is great. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks,
Very
guys.
appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks
Thank you.
to everybody.
We did have one question. Who won the election? Put in which election, but
Yeah, I think we might want to leave that one alone.
yeah,
It was definitely Omar Vizquel.
yeah. Thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Thank you very much.